So there are two kinds of shifts you'll experience in your life. There's a passive shift and there's an active shift. Passive and active. Now, active shift is when you set out to change something in your life. You want to shift something. You want to move something in your life. And that kind of shift is hard, right? You have to put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into shifting something that you want to see shifted in your life. And depending on the thing, man, it can feel like trying to move a boulder, right? Now, a passive shift is something that where you just you're just floating downstream. You don't really have to do anything. It just happens. Something is different in your life. You kind of look back and everything, something has changed. But with a passive shift, it's almost never a good change. You know what I'm saying? When you just float downstream, when you aren't active in the shifts in your life, you usually end up in a place that you don't want to be. So, nobody gets to the end of a year and says, oh man, this year I lost 30 pounds and I totally didn't even think about exercising or my diet at all. It was just awesome. I just totally accidentally lost 30 pounds. You know what I'm saying? Like a passive shift's not really a good one. Nobody says at the end of a year, like, my marriage is so much better than the beginning of the year and we didn't even try. Right? That never, if you didn't try in your relationship this year, it's not better, right? Passive shift is bad. Nobody says at the end of the year, man, my relationship with God is so much better, and I wasn't even thinking about God this year. Nobody says that. Passive shift is bad. Passive shift is downstream, downhill. You don't have to do anything to experience it. You just let go, and that's the direction you will head. But if you want to look back at the end of this year and look back and be excited about the shifts that you've experienced, then you're going to have to be intentional, right? A good shift in your life this year is going to require something. Your life is not going to accidentally get better. You're going to have to do something. So in this series, I want to talk about 4 aspects of your life where shift happens, where gravity will pull you towards something negative. And if you aren't active, if you don't fight, if you don't climb, if you don't push uphill, you will end up where you probably don't want to be. And the shift I want to look at today that will happen in your life as you go, if you don't actively push back against it, is one that I am personally and intimately acquainted with. It's the shift towards cynicism. Cynicism. I believe that cynicism has like a gravity to it. It like pulls on us. And I believe that the longer you're alive, the stronger the pull. I bet I could talk to some people who have a couple decades on me. They could tell me that, man, as you get older, the pull towards cynicism seems to get stronger. And that's scary for those of us, maybe I have a decade on you, because I get the impression that, the millennial generation, and by the way, full disclosure, I technically am a part of that, so I always speak with authority on the millennials, because I'm one of them. We struggle with this. Cynicism is like the air we breathe. And if it gets worse as you get older, can you imagine how grumpy we're going to be as old people? Like, it's going to be a problem, right? It's going to be a problem. So, cards on the table. I am a recovering cynic. Recovering, not recovered. I'm still dealing with it. And if you have an ear for that kind of thing, you'll still hear the residue of that in my life today. Secondly, I believe that cynicism is both damaging and sinful. Okay? And I didn't always believe that. So if you're a cynic today, you're going to look at me sideways. You're going to be like, I don't really believe you're a cynic, and I'll prove it to you here in a minute. But I used to wear my cynicism almost as a badge of honor. And God has kind of worked on my heart and in my life and shown me that it's both damaging to me and to the people around me. And I believe that God doesn't want that for me. That cynicism is not the disposition that God wants me to have towards the world. So if you've already shifted into cynicism, I want to show you a pathway out. I can just show you the path. I can't make you walk down that path, but I can at least show it to you. And if you're not there yet, but maybe you're shifting towards it, maybe you're teetering on the edge of it, I want to show you a better direction. So I want to look at an example of a cynic in the Bible. It's in the story where Jesus starts to call his disciples. It's in John chapter 1, starting in verse 43. So if you're not familiar, Jesus kind of called his disciples. He had certain guys he'd just walk up to, and Jesus would say, hey, come follow me. And not the same way that Christians say, I follow Jesus. Like these guys would literally follow Jesus around for 3 years. So here's the story of one of them. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, come follow me. Philip was from Bethsaida and Andrew and Peter's hometown. Philip went to look for Nathanael and told him, we have found the very person Moses and the prophets wrote about. His name is Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth. I love that the moment Philip talks to Jesus, his first instinct is to go get his buddy. So Philip, like the moment he has this like encounter with God, he has to go tell somebody that he cares about this encounter. So in the next verse, we're going to see, if you're a cynic, you're going to love this. This is like the most cynical statement in the Bible. It's in verse 46. Nazareth, exclaimed Nathanael. Can anything good come from Nazareth? And then Philip says, come and see for yourself, because Philip's used to him. So Philip's one of those good friends who kind of pushes the cynicism to the side. And he knows how to deal with his buddy. He says, come on, man, come see this. But you will be hard-pressed in the Bible to find a more cynical statement than this one. First of all, I mean, it's negative, it's distrustful. He doesn't even believe his own friend, right? His own friend has no clout with him. He doesn't believe him. And he questions the character of an entire city, right? I mean, that's cynical on top of cynical, isn't it? Now, let's stop for a minute, and we got to define what cynicism is. I want you to be on the same page with me when we talk about something that Nathaniel and me and some of you struggle with. So here's the definition of a cynic. A person who looks scornfully, who is habitually negative, callously calculating, has a pessimistic view of the world, marked by or showing contemptuous mockery. Contemptuous mockery. And here's this last part's really important. An embittered disposition of distrust born out of painful disillusionment. I feel like I could chew on that sentence. Let me say it again. An embittered disposition born of distrust born out of painful disillusionment. So if I were going to write a recipe to make a cynic, so you could make one when you went home, here's the ingredients to a cynic. You need, and forgive me, cynics, first ingredient would be a little bit of pride. Okay, you need to have a little bit of pride. I know this from experience. You need to have a little bit of pride. You need to have a little bit of life experience, okay? Because kids aren't cynics, right? You don't know a kid that's a cynic. Kids aren't cynics. You have to have a little miles on the tires to become a cynic. You have to have some pessimism, right? You got to throw a little pessimism in there. That's of course. And you can put as much in as you want, by the way. Pessimism, if you want to throw as much in there, you can just empty the bottle. You know what else you need? You need pain. Pain. You need to put some pain in there. And again, forgive me, cynics, you need fear. Fear is a key ingredient to being a cynic. And then you need some street smarts, common sense. We pride ourselves on that. We got all kinds of common sense, okay? And then if you really want to make a good cynic, you got to throw in some sarcasm, some irony, and a really quick wit. And you've got a really fun, for a moment, person to be around because they will point out all the things wrong with any situation, person that you're in. So, the cynic. Now, I told you I've come to the conclusion that I believe that cynicism is damaging to your life. And let me just share a couple of ways that I believe cynicism is damaging to your life. Number one, if you're cynical, you are unable to make connections of substance with people. You're unable to make connections of substance with people. And if you're a cynic, you're like, I don't care. I know, but they're important. If you're cynical, you're not really very fun to be around for very long, just so you know. You're fun in spurts, but a perpetually negative person, or a person, as my mentor would say, full of piss and vinegar. That's what he used to tell me that, and I thought it was a compliment. It's not. I really did. I told you, I wore my cynicism as a badge of honor, and now I realize, like a decade later, he's been insulting me this whole time. But if you're that kind of person, people can only handle you in small doses. And by the way, that's, if you're ever wondering why people kind of push away, that's why. Because they can only handle you for a little bit. And if you're funny, it can extend it a little bit. If you got that quick wit, you can be funny about your negativity. It extends the window that they can handle. But there's still only a certain amount of cynicism that people can stomach. Cynicism will prevent you from being a part of something. Like you always have to stand at a distance, off to the side as a cynic, and you can lob your criticism and your mockery from a distance, but you're never in. Many studies have shown that cynicism actually causes you to be more prone to heart disease and other life-shortening illnesses. So cynicism is, they're saying, actually shortens your lifespan, which is crazy. And maybe the worst of all, in my opinion, is that cynicism is self-perpetuating. Because once you start to be negative and distrustful, you will find the world to be a negative and painful place to live. The more you look for negativity, you'll find it. You know what I mean? If you ever bought a car before, you know how this works, right? The moment you buy a car, all of a sudden you're seeing that car everywhere. Negativity is kind of the same way. The moment you decide to be negative, you're going to see negative things everywhere you look. And if you believe that people will hurt you and people will eventually screw you over and eventually push away from you, they will. But what you don't realize is your cynicism might actually be the cause of that. Self-perpetuating, which is part of what makes it so hard to get out of. So I believe that cynicism damages you and it damages the people around you. Now, can I defend the cynic for a minute? I'm being hard on the cynics, telling you all the problems it causes, all the damage it causes, but I need to defend the cynic for a minute. I'm going to use me language, okay? For you judgmental, optimistic people, idealists in the room who are looking at me sideways right now, let me defend the cynic for a minute, okay? We weren't born this way. We weren't. Life beat cynicism into us. I was trying to think back when I first became a cynic, and I had to go all the way back to middle school. You know, when you find out that kids can be cruel for no good reason, that's when it started. That's when the seed of cynicism was planted in my heart. It really took root in high school when I found out that cynicism makes a really good shield. Did you know that? If you're a cynic, you know. Cynicism makes a really good... It's really hard to hurt a cynic. You really have a hard time because we see it coming, okay? We anticipated your move. We knew you were going to hurt us. So we are always tense and ready for the blow to fall. And then cynicism really, really kind of grew into full-blown whatever plant of cynicism in my heart in ministry. See, I made a mistake in the beginning of ministry. I thought, and you're going to laugh as soon as I say it, but it's part of what happens, part of what causes cynicism is ignorance, right? I believed that church would be different. I believed that church people wouldn't hurt me. So I put my shield down. I put my cynicism down, and I said, man, church people won't do this. Christians won't stab me. No, nobody's laughing. Why are you not laughing? That's insane. It's an insane thought. I've been stabbed too many times to count. Not only in the back and the front. Christians don't care. They'll stab you wherever, whenever, man. They'll stab you while staring you in the eye. You do not care. And they will tell you that Jesus told them to stab you. They'll spiritualize it. They'll spiritualize it. It's the worst. Can you tell? I still have a little bit. Just a little bit. I told you you'd be able to tell. See, I've been in ministry for 15 years now. If I want to go that way towards cynicism, I can predict how things are going to go before they go. I can meet somebody and tell you how they're going to leave the church. I could, first time, I'll make a prediction. I could make a book of it. We could have betting on how people are going to end up leaving the church and hating my God. I could do the whole thing. I promise. If I wanted to go into cynicism, I could dive in like that. And if you ask me, how do you know that stuff's going to happen? I'll roll up my emotional sleeve and I'll show you a scar and I'll say, this is how I know. Because I've bled for this. I've been wounded for my cynicism. I've cried for my cynicism. I've agonized for this knowledge. That's the thing, though. There's this saying, scratch any cynic and just below the surface, you'll find a disappointed idealist. That's the thing. That's the part we don't want you to know. underneath the scars, behind the shield, is a person who was at one point optimistic and trusting. Cynicism was born out of burned trust and deep wounds. That's where it came from. Cynicism is a defense mechanism, a survival instinct against a hostile world. So don't be too hard on us. We've been hurt a lot. We anticipate that you will be hard on us, just so you know. But you shouldn't be. The world kind of beat it into us. And if I may push it a little further, and here's where I'm going to push it, and I'm going to really push it here. The essence of being a cynic is a distrust of the human race, right? We believe that people are bad. We anticipate it. We believe ultimately that everybody's motives are kind of crappy and that they're going to eventually screw us over, right? We believe people are bad. That's what a cynic believes. We're not wrong. We're not wrong. Do you know that is kind of a biblical worldview? Check this out. I'm not lying. Romans chapter 3. Romans chapter 3, starting in verse 10. As the scriptures say, no one is righteous, not even one. No one is truly wise. No one is seeking God. All have turned away. All have become useless. No one does good, not a single one. And all the cynics said, amen. Right? See? Told you. I was practicing my sermon the other day. My daughter was sitting in my lap, and she's like, I'm good. I'm like, no, you're not. See, even my little 9-year-old daughter, she's not a cynic just yet. But this says that the disposition of the human race is that we're all sinful. We're all bad. So the cynic is actually right about their assumption. If you're sitting here thinking, man, people are good, what are you talking about? First of all, you haven't lived very long. Second of all, you've never had a 2-year-old. And third, you're disagreeing with what the Bible says. Every person is a sinner by nature and by choice. So the cynic is right about their assumptions about people. And that's why it's so easy to get stuck in it. Because everywhere you look, you're like, your assumptions are confirmed. Where we go wrong, cynics, is what we do with our assumptions. See, the solution to cynicism is not to turn your brain off, right, and become naive. That's not the solution, right? That's what I always thought people wanted me to do when I was really deep into it. It always seemed like, well, you should just be maybe the brighter side of life. You should assume the best about people. And what I always heard when they were saying that is, you should be dumber. Right? That's just don't actually anticipate and see what's going to happen. Just pretend that everything's going to be great. That's what I heard people saying. But what I've discovered, and through much pain I have discovered, is that naivety and idealism are not the answer to cynicism. They may be the opposite of cynicism, but they are not the answer to cynicism. The solution is not to believe that people are good when you have plenty of evidence to the contrary. That's not the way out. Let me show you the way out. So we just looked at Nathanael's first reaction to hearing about Jesus. And if you back up in that chapter, just a couple of verses, you get some other disciples meeting Jesus for the first time. And I want to look at verse 40 of John chapter 1. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of these men who heard that John said and followed Jesus. Andrew went to find his brother Simon and told him, we have found the Messiah, which means Christ. I love, there's a little observation I want to make here. Every time somebody encounters Jesus in these stories, every time one of his disciples encounters Jesus, they go and get somebody else and bring him to him. It's just an interesting observation that when they encounter the Savior, that their instinct, it was almost like a knee-jerk reaction, was to go and get somebody else and show them, hey, check this guy out. This is just an observation. And then verse 42. Then Andrew brought Simon to meet Jesus. Looking intently at Simon, Jesus said, your name is Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas, which means Peter. This is such an important interaction. If you struggle with cynicism, this right here is crazy. Because Jesus is meeting Peter for the very first time, right? They've known each other for all of 5 seconds right here. And notice this I love this little part, looking at him intently here. Jesus kind of looked him up and down. I was like, he stopped for a minute. And he wanted to analyze whatever was happening with Peter. And if you're a cynic, you do the same thing, right? When you meet people, You're making all kinds of assumptions about people based on that first interaction, right? You've got them figured out. You know what's going to happen. And to give you not the backstory, but like the future story on Peter, he's going to deny Jesus. Peter is. He's going to abandon Jesus. He's going to hightail and run in Jesus' biggest hour of need. He's going to pretend to not even know Jesus in the worst hours of Jesus' life. Peter's going to be like the worst friend, the worst follower of Jesus ever, save Judas, right? And if you're a cynic, you're saying, of course he is. Right? I would assume that somebody would do something like that. Now let me ask you, right here, the very first meeting between Jesus and Peter, does Jesus know that Peter's going to screw him over? Absolutely, right? And he doesn't just know it because he's a cynic and he's making cynical assumptions. Jesus knows it because he's Jesus, right? He knows it. He's not assuming it. He knows what Peter is going to do. So Jesus, in this moment, and the cynic actually are both making the same assumptions. For Jesus, it's not really an assumption, it's more knowledge. But they're in the same place. This guy is going to eventually screw me over. The cynic and Jesus both believe the same thing right here. Where they differ is what they do. What they do with this knowledge. So this very first interaction, Jesus changes this guy's name from Simon to Cephas, which means Peter. And if you look in the original language, this name that Jesus gives to Peter, Peter actually means rock. Rock. Rocky. And the funny thing about this is, that is the opposite of who Peter is. That is about as far from who Peter is as it can be. It'd be like you working with the big guy at work and you call him Tiny. Anybody have that? Like, you got a 6'4", 400-pound guy, hey, Tiny. Like, it's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be ironic. It's supposed to be like the opposite of who he really is. But Jesus doesn't do this kind of stuff ironically. Jesus isn't winking at his brother. This isn't like supposed to be making fun of him. Jesus, right here, is doing something really important. When he's looking intently at Simon, see, Jesus has the ability to look inside somebody's soul. Right? This isn't, like I said, this isn't some cynical assumption. Jesus is peering inside of Peter, and he speaks this to Peter. You will be called Cephas. You're going to be called Rock. The opposite of who you are. That's who you're going to be. And he speaks life into him. He blows oxygen on a coal that is like deep inside Peter's heart, a coal that is not going to catch fire for another 3.5 years. Jesus is going to spend 3 years developing Peter, pouring into Peter, calling Peter up, calling Peter out, loving Peter, believing in Peter, knowing all the time that Peter is going to deny him at the worst possible moment. In the end, when Jesus needs him most, Peter is going to stab him in the back and run away. And Jesus, in this moment, knows all of it, and he still speaks life and invites him in, rather than the cynical instinct of not saying anything nice at all and keeping him at arm's length. Jesus' instincts are the opposite. He knows he has the same information as the cynic, but he does the opposite thing. He speaks life to Peter and invites him in. He invites him in. So, dear cynic, the answer to your cynicism is not naive, gullible idealism. The answer to your cynicism is love. I'm just giving you a minute to roll your eyes. Go ahead. If you're a cynic, you already did. But I don't mean what most people mean when they say that, the shallow, warm, fuzzy stuff that our culture talks about, all the feeling. I don't mean that. I mean a deep, brave, selfless love. A love that is worth intrinsically more than the pain it costs to give it. A love that is worth intrinsically more. What I mean, like on the spiritual level, you're going to experience pain from this love, and you're giving this love, and this love actually weighs more than the pain that is going to cost you in giving that love. You believe that, like deep down in your soul, that this love inherently is worth more. That the outcome, whatever somebody does with it, doesn't matter as much as me giving it. You don't love people believing they won't hurt you. You love people knowing full well they will, and you love them anyways. See, I thought I did love. That's part of what got me into this trouble. That's part of what made me a cynic. I thought love was the problem. I thought, well, once I loved, I got hurt, and therefore, dink, put my shield back up. We're going to distance ourselves because that's what got me into trouble. But what God has showed me is that it wasn't that I was loving too much, but that I wasn't loving enough, or the right kind. The best example I can give you is the difference between a candle and a campfire. Right? Both are fire. Right? Candle's fire, campfire's fire. But if you blow on a candle, it goes out. It's gone. But if you blow on a campfire, what happens? It gets hotter, right? See, my love that I thought was strong for people, it was a candle kind of love. And the moment a breeze came through, gone. And what God has shown me through a lot of pain and through a lot of soul searching is that the kind of love I was giving was kind of a conditional kind of love. Like if I love you, I'm hoping to kind of get something back out of this. And when I don't get something back out of this, or I get hurt and my expectations get dashed, then all of a sudden I don't think it's worth it anymore. So instead of my solution was to back away, but what God did is he kind of called me to push all the way through, push through that shallow stuff and get to something deeper, a kind of love where, man, if a breeze comes through and blows on this love, it's not going to blow it out. It's actually going to make the fire hotter. And I've realized now there is an inherent value in loving people even if they hurt me. That God on his throne in heaven smiles down on me loving somebody even though in my cynical mind I know they're going to hurt me someday. My favorite author, C.S. Lewis, says it this way: to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. You know what that means, right? Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. And that's the thing we fear, right? If you're a cynic, that's the thing. And again, you don't want to admit that, but between me and you, I know that that's the thing you fear. That's why you have that shield up, is you don't want to be vulnerable because you know what it feels like to be stabbed, and you don't want to feel that anymore. The problem is, you kind of have this choice between not being vulnerable and love. You actually can't have both. You can't refuse to be vulnerable and have love. You're going to have to pick one. They are mutually exclusive. If you lower your shield, you open up the possibility of being hurt, but you also open up the possibility of love. There is no safe love. There's none. The deeper the love, the deeper the potential pain from that love. It's kind of like helping a wounded animal. They're going to bite you, right? I mean, you know that, right? They're going to bite you. You'd be naive and stupid not to believe that. So you can be stupid and get bit. You can say, screw you, animal. Deal with your problems yourself. Since you're going to bite me, I'm not going to help you. Or you can put on some thick gloves, know what's coming, and help them anyways, right? And if you think that's stupid, to apply that to your life, if you think that's stupid, then I'm going to Jesus juke you here. Then you think Jesus is stupid. Burn. Because that's the kind of love that Jesus has for all of us, right? Jesus went to the cross and experienced the ultimate pain of death and separation from God the Father, all out of love. Love cost Jesus everything. I mean, think about it. He looked at you. He didn't have to cynically look at you. He just looked at you with his all-knowing eyes, and he knew exactly what you were going to do, who you were going to be, all the mistakes, all the sin that you were ever going to do. He knew all of it the moment he saw you, and he died for you anyways. He experienced pain because of his love. But Jesus thought, the love is worth it. The pain is not as heavy as my love for you. See, that's why I think cynicism isn't just damaging. I believe it is actually sinful because it is so unlike Jesus. It's so unlike Jesus to withhold love because of the pain it might cost. If the call of Christians is to be like Jesus, then your cynicism has no place. You can keep your negative assumptions about people. I actually think it'll be helpful for you in your life. Keep your negative assumptions. You're probably right. You're probably right. But you have to love them anyways. You have to push through that shallow love. You have to accept that it's going to hurt and love them like Jesus does. So if you want to follow Jesus, you have to fight through the pain into a deeper love for people. And for some of you, this is going to be in your relationship. You're going to have to love that person that God has called you to love on a deep, deep level, even though they're going to hurt you back. For some of you, this is like a family thing. You've got some kind of family thing going on, and you've kept people at a distance because you're trying to protect yourself, and God might be calling you to love them anyways, and know that it might hurt a little bit to do that. For some of you, maybe this is a friendship that you've kept at an arm's length because you feel like you're bleeding a little bit, and God might be calling you to lower that shield so that you can love them, and yes, you might get hurt again. For some of you, this might be a church thing. Cynicism causes us not to engage in church. And again, you're not wrong. You get involved in a church, like really involved, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get hurt. And maybe that's the reason, like, you just come on Sunday mornings, but you don't really want to get any involved more deep than that, because if you get more deep than that, then you open up the possibility that one of these people sitting in this room is going to stab you emotionally, not physically, I don't think, depending. Never had that one before. But your cynicism has caused you to separate even from the church. You don't want to be close to people in the church because you're afraid that they're going to hurt you. This guy named Paul Miller said this: to be cynical is to be distant. It leads to a creeping bitterness that can deaden and even destroy the spirit. For the cynic, life is already phony. You feel as though you're just contributing to the mess. The cynic is always critiquing, but never engaged, loving, and hoping. Cynicism leaves you doubting and unable to dream. It shuts down your heart, and you just show up for life, going through the motions. It's the air you breathe, and it is suffocating your heart. It's that distance, man. That distance. When you put your shield of cynicism up, it causes you to have to separate from people. What if when it comes to church, what if God designed church that it's kind of supposed to be messy? The reason you kind of like have to go around and try to find that perfect church is because you're looking for something that actually doesn't exist. There's no church where you're not going to encounter some kind of pain when you start to love a group of people. That's why you keep looking, because you're looking for something that doesn't exist. What if God designed it this way? We're supposed to be a group of messed up people who are selfish and stupid and mean and ignorant sometimes. No offense. But in spite of all of this, our love for God and for each other is supposed to burn so bright and so hot inside of us that we don't push away, even though we know it's going to hurt, even though we know there's going to be little things here and there that jab at us and cause us to bleed. We don't push away. And we rely on God pouring his fierce love inside of us to the point of overflowing, that love that he gives us enables us to push through the pain. What if we're not supposed to be ignorant idealists? We're supposed to love people even though they may well hurt us. We're supposed to give to people even though they might take advantage of the gift. We're supposed to give godly advice even though they might not take it. We're supposed to just do all that stuff because that's what God wants us to do. And we don't worry about the outcome. We just do it because we know it pleases God. And I know that's true. John 13, most famous things that Jesus says. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you're my disciples. He doesn't say that you're not going to hurt each other. That's how you'll prove it. No, your love that pushes through all that pain, that's what's going to prove to the world that you're my disciples. You know when Jesus said this? Right before Peter denies him. Isn't that cool? Like literally the next couple of verses, Peter's like, I'll never deny you, Jesus. And Jesus is like, dude, yes, you are going to. Like in the next 20 minutes about. And right before that happens, Jesus says this. Right before Peter hurts Jesus in the worst possible way, Jesus says, guys, this is it. This is like where it's at right here. For you as Christians, you got to love each other. He's saying this to a group of men who are about to just completely abandon him. Trying to show them the kind of love that they need to have for each other. Trying to show us the kind of love that we need to have for each other. Pastor Rick, the pastor who was right before me here, had this saying. To be honest, he didn't follow his own advice, and he would tell you that himself. But he had this saying, thick skin, soft heart. This was back when I was becoming a skeptic, or a cynic. He used to say this to me. Because I was the opposite. I was thin-skinned and growing a hard heart in ministry. I stopped wanting to care, and everything hurt a little bit. But he was saying, no, thick skin, soft heart. Don't let the little stuff affect you. But don't lose the softness of your heart. And I would say, man, the air of our culture right now is the opposite of this, is it not? It's thin skin and a hard heart. If you go on any social media, everybody's got thin skin and everybody's got a hard heart. But I think God's calling us to this. Thick skin. Don't let the little stuff bother you. Don't bleed over every little thing. But keep the soft heart. Love anyways. Be brave enough to be disappointed. Be brave enough to be lied to. Be brave enough to be hurt. Let your love be deep enough that it doesn't cause you to push away. I would rather live a life full of love with too many scars to count from the pain that love caused than live a life without love, a cynical, safe, scar-free life. I think it's worth more. So the worship team's going to come out, and they're going to lead us in another song. And I guess if you are a cynic, I just want to invite you, and I know it's a dangerous invitation, but I want to invite you to lay your shield down, to love freely like Jesus asked you to allow people to get close, to actually be a part of something. And I'm not telling you you're not going to get hurt. I'm not. You are, actually. And that first one's going to sting. But I believe the kind of life that's lived inside of that shield just isn't worth living. That shell, it's going to keep everything good out, not just the bad, it's going to keep the good out too. So lay it down and allow people to get close. And then you're going to have to plug into Jesus. You're going to have to plug in to his love and his healing, because it is going to hurt. And your reaction is going to be to recoil. Your reaction is going to be to put the shield back up. You got to plug into Jesus and ask Jesus to give you the strength to be able to continue to love through that. And that'll be the life that Jesus wants you to live. And if you're not a cynic yet, and you're kind of looking at me weird, man, I just want to encourage you, don't pick that shield up. It's going to be tempting as you go in your life to pick that shield up and block all the pain that comes with life. Don't do it. Be brave. Put the shield down. Keep loving anyways. It's what Jesus did.